You are sitting at your kitchen table. It is late, maybe 10, 11 at night. The offer letter is open in front of you, pen in your hand. You have been waiting for this for a while. New company, better title, more money. Everything you have been working toward, and you are reading through the letter. Compensation looks right, start date works, benefits are decent, and then you get to the last section, the part with the small font, the part that starts using words like intellectual property and non-solicitation and post-employment obligations. And something in your brain just shifts. Not alarm, just fatigue. You have been reading for a while. The important stuff is already settled. This feels like the fine print, standard language, boilerplate. So you scroll, you skim, you sign, and then 3 months go by, or a year, or two, and something happens. A recruiter calls, an opportunity shows up, or you reach a point where you know it is time to go. And that is when that document you signed comes back, not as an offer, as a wall. You are looking at a clause you barely remember reading, and it is telling you what you can and cannot do next. That is what we are talking about today, because some of the language buried in your employment contract is not there to protect you. It is there to protect the company from you. And those two things are not the same. If this channel is new to you, subscribe before you keep watching. Because what we cover here is the stuff most people only learn after it has already cost them something. Let me give you some context first. In the United States, most employment is what lawyers call at will. That means either side can end the relationship at any time for almost any reason without owing the other person an explanation. Because of that, a lot of people assume contracts do not really matter. They figure, if the job is at will anyway, what is the contract even doing? Here's the thing. Your job may be at will, but your contract can still include language that follows you after you leave. The job ends. The restrictions do not. And here's something even more important. Two people can sign contracts that look almost identical on the surface, but one of those contracts is significantly more restrictive than the other. Same title, same company size, same industry, but completely different levels of exposure. The difference is in the language, and most people never look closely enough to catch it. Now, I want to be fair about this. From the company's perspective, there is a real reason these clauses exist. They spend time and money training employees. They build client relationships. They develop internal processes, systems, strategies. And they do not want someone to walk out the door on a Friday and walk into a competitor on Monday, taking all of that with them. That logic is reasonable. Protecting legitimate business interests is a real thing. But here's where the problem starts. When that language gets written too broadly or left vague on purpose, it stops protecting the company from actual harm. And it starts controlling where you can go, what you can do, and who you can talk to. And the reason most employees do not push back is simple. Nothing feels wrong on the day you sign. Everything feels like a formality. The job is exciting. You are not thinking about leaving on the day you are starting. So you move past it. And the company counts on exactly that. Let me tell you about Danielle. Danielle is a marketing manager in Atlanta. She has been at her company for 4 years. She is good at her job. Her reviews are solid. She has built real relationships with clients. Then she gets a call from a recruiter. Different company. Better pay. A title she has been working toward. She goes through the process, gets the offer, takes a breath, and puts in her resignation. And that is when the mood in the room changes. HR asks her to come in for a meeting, not to negotiate, not to send her off well, to remind her of a document she signed 4 years ago. The contract she barely looked at on her first week. It included a non-compete. The language said she could not work for any competing business within a defined geographic area for 12 months after leaving. Her new company, the one that just offered her the role, fell inside that definition. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody made a direct threat. They just laid out what the agreement said. Calmly, professionally, but the message was clear. You can leave, but not like that. And in that moment, Danielle realized something. She had been thinking of the contract as the beginning of her job. It was actually about the end. Let me walk you through the specific clauses that show up most often. These are not unusual. Most corporate employment contracts include at least one of them. The first one is the non-compete. This limits where you can work after you leave. Some states have put tight restrictions on these. California, for example, largely does not enforce them. But in many other states, a well-drafted non-compete can hold up in court depending on how it is scoped. Time limits, geographic range, and how competitor is defined all determine how much weight it carries. The second one is the non-solicitation clause. This one prevents you from reaching out to clients or coworkers after you leave, even if you built those relationships yourself, even if those people would follow you willingly. The clause says those connections belong to the company, not to you. The third is the intellectual property clause. This is one people overlook the most. It typically states that anything you create that is related to your work belongs to the company. And here's where it gets complicated. Some contracts extend that language to things you create outside of work, on your own time, on your personal devices. If the company decides it is related to the industry you work in, they may argue it belongs to them. The fourth is broad confidentiality language. Most people understand that trade secrets and private client data are off limits. But some confidentiality clauses are written so broadly that they could apply to general industry knowledge. Things you know from experience, skills you developed on the job. The line between protecting company information and restricting your professional growth can get very thin. And then there is the fifth issue, which is not about one specific clause. It is about vague wording in general. Phrases like similar business or related services or competitive activities, none of those have a fixed legal definition, which means in a dispute, the company gets to argue for the broadest possible interpretation. And you are left trying to prove it does not apply. The impact of these clauses rarely shows up right away. Most of the time, you do not feel it until you are trying to move. You start interviewing at a company in the same industry. Their legal team does a routine review. They see your non-compete. And suddenly there is hesitation. Not a hard no. Just a pause. A question about legal risk. A conversation that gets kicked up to someone else. And some companies will not take that risk. Not because you are not the right person, but because they do not want the exposure. Offers get withdrawn, timelines get pushed, opportunities go to the next candidate who does not have that language on their record. And you never get a full explanation. You just stop hearing back. Other times it plays out differently. You launch something of your own, a side business, a consulting practice, a freelance client. And your former employer sends a letter, not necessarily to sue you, just to remind you what you agreed to. That letter costs money to respond to, even if the claim goes nowhere. It creates stress, it slows you down, and sometimes that is the whole point. Here is what most people get wrong. They read the contract as if it is describing the job they are about to start, but that is not what the back half of a contract is for. The compensation section is about the job you are starting. The restriction section is about the options you will have when you try to leave. Those are two completely different conversations, and you are being asked to sign off on both of them at the same time, in the same moment. While you are focused on the one that feels exciting. You are not just signing for who you are today, you are signing for a version of yourself 2, 3, 4 years from now. A version who might want something different, who might need more room to move. And that version of you does not have a seat at the table when you sign. So, what do you actually do with this information? First, slow down when you reach the restriction sections. Do not skim past them because the language feels dry. Read specifically for time limits, geographic scope, and how key terms like competitor or related industry are defined. If those terms are left vague, that vagueness is a problem. Second, ask questions before you sign. You do not have to be aggressive about it. You can simply say, I want to make sure I understand how this applies if my role changes or if I transition out at some point. That is a reasonable professional question, and how they answer it tells you a lot. Third, negotiate the language where you can. This is where most people stop themselves because they assume contracts are final. They are not always final. A clause that says you cannot work for any competing company can sometimes become you cannot work for direct competitors in a specifically defined segment of the market. Same general idea. Very different level of restriction. You are not being difficult by asking for that kind of specificity. You are being clear. Fourth, if something feels off, pause before you sign. You are allowed to take a day. You are allowed to ask an employment attorney to review it. A 1-hour consultation can save you a year of being stuck. And a company that responds badly to you taking that pause is also telling you something. Here is the honest part. Most people who have signed something they later regretted were not careless people. They were excited. They were tired. They were trusting a process that felt normal. And nothing in that moment signaled danger. The office was nice. The people seemed good. The offer was fair. Contracts are not written for the good days. They are written for the moment when things stop being good, for the moment when your interests and the company's interests are no longer the same. And by the time that moment arrives, the conversation about what you agreed to is already over. The only time you can shape those terms is before you sign, not after. I want to say something directly before we close. You are not wrong for trusting a company that brought you in, made you an offer, and put something in front of you to sign. That trust is not naive. That is just how these situations work. But there is a difference between trusting people and blindly trusting documents. People can be good and still work for a company whose legal department writes aggressive contracts. The two things are not connected. Most of what you agree to at work goes unread, not because you are uninformed, but because nobody ever told you it was worth reading. That is what this channel is here for. Awareness is what gives you room to move. You cannot negotiate what you do not see. You cannot protect yourself from something you assumed was fine. The people who navigate these situations well are not necessarily smarter or more connected. They just knew what to look for. And now you do too. If you have ever signed something at work and later realized you did not fully understand what you agreed to, drop it in the comments. You would be surprised how many people are sitting on the same story. Share this with someone before they sign their next offer letter. Subscribe if you want to keep moving smarter at work, and I will see you in the next one.